And so it does save you a lot of time. It's not the push of a button. It means that instead of paying $1,000 to translate your assessment, you're going to pay just 500. Instead of having to wait 20 days, you're going to wait just 10 days to have the reviewed version. It's that sort of scale. There is significant efficiency gains, but it's not foolproof. Far from it. And every translated test needs to be piloted, just like a test in English. It's from the data that you find out whether it works or not.
Hello, welcome to the Test Community Network. My name is Tim Burnett. Here we are in conversation today with Steve Dept, talking about the art and science of translation. If this is a topic of interest to you, if you're trying to export your qualification overseas and you want to understand how you can translate your items so that candidates actually understand their full meaning, then you really, really need to listen to this conversation. Steve is an absolute expert on this topic, and he takes through quite a few examples of where people have got it right, people have got it absolutely wrong. There's some really quite interesting complications in this process, and I think what's also, Steve, gives you an insight as to how generative AI can support you in this, where it fits within the scale of things. Obviously, when you look at this kind of topic, there's the highest quality you can go, and there's some good quality, but there's also some really bad routes you could take as well. And Steve kind of gives you a really big insight into that. So we'll play that in a second. Just as ever, anything you see and hear on today is available on the Test Community Network website. If you want to subscribe, then you receive through a lovely email once a week full of rich details of all the events and activities that are going on within the Test Community Network. So a nice kind of summarization of there as well. You also get access to the full recording with me in conversation with Steve. So I'm going to share a little bit with you for today, but the full recording is going to be there as well. Other activities and events going on in the space then, we've got ALT Generative AI and Digital Assessment. That's a UK based organization, Association for Learning Technologies. Worth checking that out. We have the AATP Coffee Chat, so join Nina and I think Stephanie Daly from Measure is going to be on that one, and they're going to be unlocking the success in assessment industry. It's worth watching that if you're part of the assessment space. Jeremy Carter and the team, I think, are talking alongside, maybe in this one, alongside Riser as well. So Centera, they do virtual experiences for medical-based examinations. So if you want to learn more about that, then please do check that out. Leadership in Higher Education Conference, that's an online conference, is taking place 28th to 30th. So if you're interested in higher education, then look at that. And then a couple of things there from the Marketplace of the Year set to take off in K-12 in schools in terms of AI. I'm hearing a lot of that, people saying that 2025 is the year for AI in a lot of spaces. Yeah, I think it could be. I think if you're not thinking that, then maybe you need to revise your plans for the year. Some good jobs going. Alpine Testing, I've got a test development professional job. They've got about 3 or 4 others on there, and I've been posting other jobs on there as well. So if you're looking for that new year change. I also put a post on LinkedIn recently, New Year, New You. You get, you go through a series of questions and you basically say what you want to become, and it pulls out a roadmap for you as part of your training journey, things that you need to acquire, skills, etc. along that journey. So it's worth having a look at that post as well. I'll stick it in the notes actually for the show. We've got the reports on future of jobs, so talking of jobs, World Economic Forum. There's quite a few other reports on the marketplace as well. So if you're looking for that data side of things, then it's worth checking that out. Of course, when you get a report, you want to summarize it, stick it in Notebook LM. If you're not using that, it is a superb tool. You really should be having a look at that. Edge Futurists, they've got contextualizing AI, and then that's a podcast. Then we've got the teacher's perspective of how to approach AI as an institution. That's the EdTech podcast there. The podcast player, you can I curate lots of great podcasts that come out. You'll be able to check that out and you'll be able to listen to it there and then. I've got some good plans as well, extra ways we can add to that feature as well going forward. But without any more chatter from me, here's me in conversation with Steve Dept talking about the art and science of translation. Here we go. Thank you for joining me. How are you?
Not too bad, all things considered. Thanks for having me, Tim.
That's fine. So for anyone who doesn't know anything about you and the work that you do in your organization, do you want to give us a quick introduction?
Quick one. That's always the challenge, isn't it? Okay. I'm a linguist by training, and I founded cApStAn 25 years ago, focusing on comparability and equivalence of test items across languages, across regions, and across cultures. First big project was the PISA, Program for International Student Assessment for the OECD. Started off with 32 languages. Right now we're doing 57 languages in over 100 countries. Still in that one. And what was interesting was that there was no taxonomy at the time to evaluate the quality of translated assessments. There are, of course, metrics like grammar and syntax and phraseology and accuracy and precision, but there are so many things in assessments that are unique to assessments, that are linked to psychometrics, and that linguists don't know about, that we decided to focus on that. And for the past 25 years, cApStAn has done virtually nothing else than either localizing assessments or evaluating the quality of translations produced either by independent organizations or more recently by neural machine translation, by large language models. And the whole starting point for us is validity, reliability, fairness of the translated items. So you compare them to see whether the linguistic features that drive the psychometric properties of the items, whether they remain the same across the different language different variants. So that's our activity. We're a small team. We're about 30 people, seven in the US, and the rest in Europe. We do have contracts with about 700 linguists and subject matter experts worldwide, some of the finest in the profession. And the last 2 or 3 years, part of our activity has become workflow consultancy. Workflow consultancy is telling people who want to translate or localize items what technology they can use, what technology is safe to use, what combination of applications, where in the workflow does human expertise add the most value, that sort of advice. That's been very rewarding because everybody wants to use technology, but people are often at a loss. Okay, what is best? What is safe? Can I do this? Who is accountable? And so we dig into that.
And when you started out 25 years ago, were you using AI then? Did you start?
Well, AI is such a broad umbrella term, you know.
I know, and I suppose so. Everyone kind of thinks, well, AI has just been born. Well, obviously, it has.
Yeah. No.
And I know you've been using AI as a kind of longer journey, but it's kind of when you first started out, were you using any kind of technology, or was it pure?
Yeah, no, we were using what is known as CAT tools. That's computer-assisted translation tools. And what these tools do, they still depend on the quality of the human translator. But what they do is, as you work on the translation, the tool creates a translation memory. What it implies is that every time you come across a statement, a prompt, an item that is close to something you've translated before, what you've done previously pops up, and either you use it again, you edit it, or you discard it. You think, no, in this context, it's no good. But it saves you, of course, a lot of time, guarantees more consistency, and that was already a form of AI. You know, a spell check is a form of AI. Autocomplete on your phone is a form of AI. So, yes, we used machine learning since 2006, I think, for term extraction, you know, to create glossaries, term bases, and we've been using machine translation. Since 2001 was my first contract with the European Union for post-editing of raw machine translation output. That's 2001. Okay, at that time, machine translation was rule-based. Then it became statistical. Then it became hybrid. Then it became neural. But it's machine translation, right? And we've been using neural machine translation engines in some use cases, not for actual assessments, to be honest, only for scoring guides, prompts, automatically generated reports. So neural machine translation and post edition since 2017. And we're using large language models for a number of tasks. but rarely for translation for a number of reasons.
And what's for anyone who doesn't know, then what's the difference between rules-based stat? You said stats-based, I think it was, wasn't it? And neural. What are the kind of distinct differences between those?
Yeah,
give me some examples.
Yeah, let's keep it simple. The first rule-based machine translation engines, you programmed a set of rules. The first one had 16 rules, and so you input, for example, English tests, and it submits that English to 16 sets of rules and come up with what it thinks should be the translation, say in Italian. So that's really a lot of hard-coded stuff. Statistical, there you use bilingual corpora. Bilingual corpora means huge data sets with a lot of material that exists in two languages. And so that was the first Google Translate used that a lot in the beginning. It looks in that huge training set, is there anything that looks like what you're inputting? And based on that, predicts what is statistically the most plausible translation.
Yeah, so the highest probability kind of outcome from that. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe good, maybe not good. It was often quite decent. We didn't post anything since 2001, as I said. And sometimes you had to rewrite text, but sometimes, at least if the master was well written, short, concise, subject, verb, object, you'd have pretty good results from the start. Then that's statistical. Then neural machine translation tried to imitate the neural networks in the brain, and you have many layers. Deep learning, it's called, and there are layers that the programmers don't actually master. So you go and fetch in those different layers things that you've done before, feedback that you've had before. You mix several data sets, and you come up with something more dynamic. The problem with neural machine translation, beginning for us, was that it produced stuff that was so fluent, so slick, it read so well that it became sometimes challenging to actually realize that it was saying something else than what it was supposed to say. So it just read so well. So positing became more difficult. With large machine translation models, in fact, large language models use a very simple piece of architecture. It's called the transformer model. And the transformer model is also a probabilistic model in the sense that it constantly tries to guess what is the most plausible next word. Then it has two words. What is the most plausible next word for those two? Then it has a string of 3 words. What is the most plausible for the 3, and so on. Yeah. And goes back and forth with billions of parameters and a lot of computing power. So very fast, it produces plausible output, which can be very good, very accurate, and can be completely off the mark. I have one nice anecdote. It was just a few months ago. We had to translate a set of instructions to users of a test into Portuguese on the fly, because we thought the test was only in English and French, but it turned to be in Portuguese as well. And we really had to produce document overnight. So I asked the large language model, that was Claude from Anthropic. I asked, okay, here are 5 basic instructions in French. Is it possible to have those in Portuguese? And up the machine spat out things that were really cool. My passive Portuguese is good enough. I thought this is perfect. I did send it to a Portuguese linguist to be sure, without knowing whether I'd get an immediate reply, but I was happy. Then I asked the model, may I give you another set of prompts and instructions to translate into Portuguese? And the model answered, sure, and gave me 20 more translation Portuguese of text I did not input.
Right. Yeah.
So
it went rogue.
Well, it means that machine doesn't translate. It says, okay, this guy wants more prompts. I give them. I can find them in Portuguese. Here they are. Of course, if you rely on that as a translation model, sometimes you can have big surprises. But it's very, very helpful.
Yeah.
The transformer model. Let's say, everybody speaks about hallucinations. I like to use confabulation. In fact, it's not that the model tries to bullshit you. I can use the word bullshit because it's now
Yeah,
scientifically recognized concept. Producing bullshit does not mean trying to fool you. It means producing output that does not take true or false into account. That's what it means. And it can do that at scale very fast. But in fact, it's the expected behavior. It is not expected to be producing factually correct information. It's expected to produce plausible information, right? So an interesting experiment that we did for a big client not so long ago. They have 360-degree reports and exams and tests for their executives. And these tests have been very, very carefully localized by cApStAn over the past year and a half. And now those tests produce output, sort of dashboards for the candidates. And they were trying to either produce those dashboards automatically using OpenAI in English, and then have OpenAI translate them into, it was seven languages. And then they also tried to have the large language model produce them directly into those 7 languages, not going through English, by looking at the results of the tests in those languages, right? And they asked us to make a criterion-based comparison of the output, which was most suitable. And in fact, turns out that the ones generated in English and translated by the large language model were very, very literal. They were literally translated and often to the point of being awkward, not being understandable in target language, very, very stiff sort of thing. Also for tests, it is known that literal translations don't work well. The classical example is how many sides does a hexagon have in English? If in your language it translates to how many sides does a 6-sided figure have, the item doesn't work. The translation is perfect. The other example is, if you have a multiple choice question and you have the distractor that sticks out, or the key, the correct response that sticks out. The literature shows that an undecided candidate is most likely to choose the one that sticks out. Now, if you have a linguist doing a perfect job, but it's not the same one that sticks out, it's not the correct response, but a distractor, you've actually modified the properties of the item. You will have different behavior from respondents, and the translation is perfect. So you just can't rely on purely translation models. You need to have that human expertise. Of course, for that last example, I can cheat and I can program that the proportional length of key and distractors must remain the same. Otherwise, you get a flag. Okay.
But so if you have to have that human, so I think obviously people are looking at the moment at the large language models, Claude, ChatGPT, etc., and thinking, well, okay, I can just throw in my items into there and do a straight translation of them and put those out, and they're fine. And I think sometimes people test them by taking the translated item and turn it back into the original language. So, Portuguese and take the Portuguese back to English. And does it look about the same? Yeah. Okay. It looks about the same. There we go. Job done. You're saying then that it's still important to have the trained linguist look at those. Do we think that we're in a position where at some point down the line we'll be able to translate assessments on the fly without the linguist being involved? Or do we still, if you want that absolute accuracy, if that's really important, you still need to have that process? Where do you see us going with this kind of journey?
I think we're not talking about reaching absolute accuracy. We're talking about even basic equivalence. It cannot reach that equivalence for the moment, and I don't think that's going to improve that much. Certainly with large language models. First, I'll finish that comparison. We started off with those straightforward translations, that too literal. And then we looked at what was generated directly in target languages, which seems to make a lot of sense. rather than generating reports in English and then translating them in different languages. Look at the results of the tests taken in French and generate something in French. And what we looked at with the large language model output there was that it's very, very fluent also. It reads well, it seems to make sense. But the problem is that the output was quite different across languages. So you have the same scores for the same traits, and you have reports saying different things. Because those large language models have a lot of leeway. Their data sets are different for the different languages. Their capacity to translate differs from one language pair to another and one subject matter to the other. Now back to your question. The thing with large language models is that they're a bit running out of data to be trained. And so what they do, they scrape data from the internet. The fact that more and more people use large language models to generate let's say subpar quality translated materials, that's out there now. That bad quality material is now used to train the model. And so
synthetic data, isn't it? It's going back into the system.
Yeah, so it's sort of a cause of recursion. It's sort of choking on your own exhaust, and I don't think that we're going to see spectacular progress. We're going to see incremental progress. You know the law of Pareto, right? It takes 20% of the effort to get 80% of the result, and another 80% of effort to get the last 20%. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So there's that spectacular beginning now. And I think that progress will be incremental. I'm not saying you need to use humans everywhere. What we now use when we use machine-driven workflows, we take items. When there's a good language pair, let's say, we don't do that for Swahili or Tagalog, but we do it for German or Spanish. When you have a good language pair, you run a trained neural machine translation engine. That is one that has the terminology that you need in that assessment, sample tests for the same project or the same client that have been translated before. The machine engine is trained on that, and so has a good idea of what you're after. And that machine then produces a raw machine translation output, and that can be made available immediately, but it's not good enough. So after that, we graft on it an AIQE, which is AI quality estimation. And for each segment, it gives you a confidence score. It says, for example, okay, the apple is green, la pomme est verte. That is very likely to be perfect, so I give it a high score. The apple that my sister bought from the store that does not usually sell apples is bigger than the apple that my brother bought from the store that usually does sell apples. Okay, long, complex, and the AI quality estimation model looks at a few parameters, subject, verb agreement, syntax, and so on, and gives a confidence score. It says, look, this is, it can be iffy. It's for example, it's 70 out of 100 and not 90 out of 100.
Because the complexity of the sentence and the
but it also analyzes. It also analyzes whether all the words that are in the source are present in the target, whether the link between the subjects and the objects and the verbs are the same. It can analyze that much. So it can give you an idea of the accuracy and of whether that's reliable or not, and it can give you a score about, okay, this is really iffy. Don't touch it. What it means is that we can now automatically translate an assessment, automatically estimate the quality of that translation, and the client gets that immediately. It gets a partially reliable translation with little caveats, with little flags everywhere when it's not. And then on demand, the client can push a button and say, okay, we want this post edited, or we want this reviewed, and you can either review the whole thing if it's a really high stakes assessment, or just if you don't have much budget and it's not such a high stakes assessment, you review all the ones with a low confidence interval. And so it does save you a lot of time. It's not the push of a button. It means that instead of paying $1,000 to translate your assessment, you're going to pay just 500. And instead of having to wait 20 days, you're going to wait just 10 days to have the reviewed version. It's that sort of scale. There's significant efficiency gains, but it's not foolproof. Far from it. And every translated test needs to be piloted, just like a test in English. It's from the data that you find out whether it works or not. Not just, you can't upfront say, this is 100% reliable translation that will work the same way in the target culture. You just can't.
I imagine there's quite a few organizations out there that have been through that process where they've had their tests translated, maybe either human or doing it through AI or something, some kind of platform. And I suspect they're probably not doing that evaluation as much as they should do and looking at the scores and the items. There might be a couple of obvious things that they pick up, but I reckon there's going to be a few little, like you say, those small factors where it's almost, it's 75%, and that is going to be enough to be knocking a candidate off a mark or two.
Sure.
But yeah, because they're not seeing that, and they're not doing that review process, they're probably there is probably some differences there. So it's important, isn't it, then, to kind of make sure that yes, you've gone through that process, you've gone through that workflow, but you're after launch, or after, certainly have a pilot, but certainly after launch, keep analyzing that data and making sure that things are accurate for your assessment. Would you say that is important, isn't it?
That's key. It's key. Actually, our full service would be when we localize, when we translate, not when we evaluate other people's translations, although it's happened a few times, is that we analyze the item statistics after the pilot, after the cognitive lab, for example, the pilot, sometimes with eye tracking, and we look at what doesn't seem to work correctly, and we try to find out whether it's due to the translation or to something else. If you ask a question about logarithms to people who haven't had logarithms in school, it doesn't matter how well it's translated, of course. So it's but that analysis of item characteristics, of discrimination, of item fit, of point P by serials feeds into improving the translations for the next round. And so we have this huge database of very common, I wouldn't say errors, but problems that arise in test translation.
I think that's been really useful, though, because it's given us a plotted history there of, I suppose, the development, the process that's gone since the 25 years that you've been working on this, and I think it really helps people understand just how accurate the model is, so they can make their own informed decision based on the stakes of the assessment. And I think, obviously, you can go and see, let's say you go and see a general doctor about a problem, and you're going to get a general doctor's response. But when we're talking about assessment, then you're like the brain surgeons of assessment. You're the specialized linguistic team involved in that process. So I think it's important that people reach out and connect with people like yourselves if you're dealing with assessment, because, like you say, it's not just about the translation. There's a whole wider aspect that's involved in that process. So, I'm sure people are going to find that absolutely fascinating. I really do appreciate it. I've got one last question for you before I let you go. Is how many languages do you speak, Steve?
If I had to list all the languages in which I can say a few words, it would really be boasting. That's not knowing a language, right?
It's better than I can.
Yeah. So, and I'm a linguist by training. So, there are many things I can't do. I can't fix my sink when it's broken. But languages are my bread and butter, right? So many of the languages I studied them to understand how they work. It doesn't mean I speak them well. I understand their structure. Let's say actually speaking fluently like I speak English with you now, I'd have to limit it to 6 or 7.
Okay, still good. But so how many countries could you? How many languages could you order a beer? That's the most important thing.
Must be around A bit less than 30, I would say.
Honestly, that's brilliant. I think so. If anyone's looking for just a global drinking partner, then Steve is your person there. I really appreciate that, Steve. That's excellent. Thank you very much for that kind of guided tour, really, I suppose, of the whole kind of linguistics side of assessment. So thank you, and I look forward to speaking to you in the future and seeing you at a conference soon. Thank you very much, Steve.
Yeah, I'd love to. Always good catching up with you. Thanks for having me, Tim.
Thanks, Steve.
Have a great one.
Thanks, that's Steve. That was excellent. Really fascinating conversation there. Just really, I think it's the hexagon one is the amazing example of how a translation really could go wrong. And if you just, this is the problem with translation. If you don't understand the language and the way it's spoken and how it's interpreted on that end, how can you properly check that? So that's where it's so important to have good processes involved, good technology involved, and good teams involved advising you on that. So thank you for that, Steve. I hope you all found that very useful. And just to mention as well, I'm sure Steve, when he says about drinking partner, it could be tea and coffee. It doesn't have to be beer. So I'm sure you appreciate that. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for watching, and I hope to speak to you next week with another amazing interview. Thank you and goodbye.